Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jason, for that kind introduction. And I don't know if it's the most complicated job in the world, but it is pretty complicated. Thanks for that upgrade, too. Before I get started, I want to give a shout out to the first table of people I saw when I came back, and that's the group of PSC regulatory employees in the back corner. They do an incredible job. I'd like to give them a round of applause. Their oversight of the industry is really important, and it lends a lot of credibility to this industry in not only in our state, but in the nation as a whole. And we really appreciate their work, and I know they appreciate their partnership with the industry as a whole. Oh, and I see my colleague Sherry Haugenhoffert, and I'm sure Randy Chrisman is here someplace too. There's Randy. Shout out to you guys as well, and the whole PSC team. So on Sunday, I was in the kitchen doing some work, and I opened the freezer, and our freezer's been kind of causing us trouble, and the lights didn't go on. And I thought, oh shoot, this fridge broke down. And I turned over to across the room. My husband was in the living room staring at a blank TV screen. And I said, Mike, this freezer isn't working. And he goes, the power's out, Julie. And I said, oh, okay. So a couple minutes later, our son from downstairs yells out, Mom, Dad, get the power back on. I can't do my homework. And we were like, we wish we could, but it's a power outage. And he is pretty unfamiliar with power outages because we don't have them that often in North Dakota. And so, we started thinking, well, what can we do? We can't do laundry. I can't cook supper. My phone battery was almost dead, so there was a limit to how much time I could spend on that. Couldn't work out in our shop because there was no lights to provide any support for that. We started worrying about a freezer. We had a couple freezers full of meat that we had been holding for folks. We butchered some cows, and we were selling that to some friends, and we had a bunch of meat in our house, 2 freezers full of meat. I started worrying a little bit about that, thinking, I wonder how long this power outage is going to go on. And then the worst thing of all was we couldn't watch NFL football. So that's when we knew it was truly a disaster and things had to change fast. But it did. Our Grand Sioux got the power back on for us quickly, and we went about our lives. But I share this story because even for myself as a utility regulator and someone who's really aware of how important the power in the electricity system is to us, it was again a real reminder about just how dependent we are on power. We are pretty much helpless without it. Our entire society is built around reliable and affordable electricity. This is a lesson that we've learned time and again in our country. Storm Uri, a few years back, $280 billion in economic losses in Texas alone, and hundreds of lives lost because we didn't have the power. Storm Elliott last winter, another huge disaster. Could have been far worse. If you read the most recent FERC report about that storm, you can learn that in a huge part of the eastern part of the country, the most highly populated part of our country, the gas system was really close to losing pressure, so much pressure that the whole system would have been lost. And it would have taken months for them to restore, house by house, every gas customer. And yet, despite all these warnings and additional warnings from the agencies like NERC, who are responsible for looking out for the reliability of the grid, and actually on the heels of all of these warnings and experiences, the EPA comes out with a ruling that will effectively gut our nation's coal and gas-powered electricity system by 2030, leaving grid operators with very few options to keep the power on when renewables aren't producing. Meanwhile, throughout the country, and even in our own state, I'm very saddened to say, citizens are fighting and obstructing the construction of new energy infrastructure at the same time that utilities, states, and even the president are calling for more aggressive decarbonization and faster timelines to get there. It's safe to say that everyone in this room has grave concerns about the experimentation that's taking place with our energy system and our electric grid. This is not the place for experiments. I hate hyperbole, but I don't know how else to describe it. Our nation's current energy policies are leading us toward a train wreck, and most Americans have virtually no idea how serious the situation is. So the question remains, what do we do about it? Do we whine and complain? Sure, gotta vent somehow, helps get rid of stress. Should we wish it was different? Yeah, we should do that too. Should we throw up our hands and resign ourselves to this uncertain destiny? I sure hope not. That's not an option. So here's what I'm doing. A few years back, there was an opportunity for someone from our region to run for the National Association of Utility Regulatory Commissioners president role, and I was looking at what was going on in the country and what the conversations were like in our sector, and I thought, I'm going to run for that job so then I can help set the conversation. And I did, and I won, thanks to my colleagues' support throughout the region, and I will take over as president of that group in November. I am already preparing for what the next year is going to bring in terms of conversations with people in my job throughout the country, and I have really big plans. I'm really looking forward to it and excited about having the opportunity to help set the stage and help set the conversation. So I'm an optimist, and I'm a firm believer in the power of one person to make a difference. And there are a lot more than one people in this room. We all have a voice, and we all need to get out there and use it. We need to get beyond the walls of this room and start influencing those around us to change the direction that we're going. So I was scheduled to talk about the EPA rules and their impact on the power grid, and I'm going to reference that a little bit. And I hope you're not disappointed, but I'm not going to go through all of that because I realized, thanks to Isaac Orr, who called me last week and asked me what I was going to talk about, Isaac Orr is a researcher from the Center for American Experiment, and he's really going to cover most of what I intended to cover on his presentation on Thursday. So I think you'll get more out of what he's going to say. And so just suffice to say, before the recent EPA rules on greenhouse gases that just came out, I looked carefully at the research that Isaac's going to go through. And if you look at just the EPA's rules on coal combustion residuals, the Good Neighbor Rule, and MATS, the impact on the coal fleet in this country would have led to the retirement of 107 gigawatts of power in the next 5 years. And so even in a room full of geeks who understand what a gigawatt is, that's hard to get your brain around. How much is that? 107 gigawatts is the equivalent of the entire MISO 15-state region's load in Storm Uri in 5 years. So, and that's before the greenhouse gas rules. So what the EPA is proposing is absolutely unsustainable for our country. So we have to circle the wagons and push back on those rules. And Isaac's going to talk more about those. So for the remainder of my time, what I wanted to share with you this morning is observations that I've gained from my decade as a utility regulator and my 7 years as the state's liaison to MISO. And my hope is to give you some actionable ideas for things that your industry and each one of you can do to fight back on the movement to shut you down. So first, the EPA rules. Obviously, we have to fight those. This is underway. Jason alluded to that. And so I'm not going to belabor this a whole lot. And legal battles are an area where the coal industry is very familiar. You're very familiar fighting those. And in my observation, you've maybe spent too much time or relied too much on the legal front over the years at the expense of some of the other issues that I'm going to point out. But that's the way it is. Certainly the legal battle against EPA is a vital front right now. But beyond that, what can you do? I have 5 ideas. First of all, you need to perform. And by that I mean you need to make darn sure that your plants are ready for winter and you've taken every possible measure to ensure that you can deliver at the maximum capacity on the tightest days when you're needed the most this winter. Obviously, this is something you're working hard on, but you need to double back. You need to think about every possible X factor that could lead to your being offline, and you need to do whatever you can to eliminate it now leading into winter, even things that seem out of your control. You need to talk to your customers, your operators, look at everything that could be causing a problem. Your performance must be at its absolute best this winter. And why is that? Because right now, everyone's looking at you, and they want to find ways that you're not performing. They want to find ways that you're weak. So you have to be strong as you've ever been. And then when you do perform, you need to tell your story. This is my second suggestion. So by raise of hands, how many of you have an account on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, or you have a child or spouse that does? Raise your hand. Almost everybody. And those who didn't, I think you're lying. When your plant is pumping out electricity at full capacity, when demand is high, you should be plastering that everywhere. Your industry should be sending out news releases, making videos, sending letters to Washington, to Wall Street investors, to Minnesota state legislators. You provide well over half of this nation's electric power, but Americans don't realize it. This is unacceptable, especially in today's world where social media can take messages viral. You need to get creative. Sponsor a Day Without Coal Power event in Washington, D.C. or nationwide. Find a way to show people the impact that shutting down this industry is going to have on this country. Better yet, broaden your efforts and include all the fossil fuels. Our leaders are living in a fantasy world when it comes to energy policy. They need to hear the truth about the impacts of their vision. Third, Jason talked a little bit about this, and you've started down this, but you need to double back. You need to take your seat at the table in MISO, in SPP, in PJM, ERCOT, ISO New England, and the Western, all of the RTOs. I know that most of the people in this room are probably just working in MISO or SPP, but you certainly have colleagues that are working in PJM, in the ISO New England area, ERCOT, et cetera. Your industry has to start flooding those market conversations. These are complicated organizations that require constant professional attention. Ask Randy. He and I both work at least 50% of our time on the RTOs alone, and we have staff that help us. You can't count on others to defend you. You are grossly outnumbered and outgunned in these organizations, almost to the point of being irrelevant. They have stakeholder meetings every single week, and that's where you have to have your voices heard. You have to understand what the policies are that are being proposed and how they might impact your organization. And like I said, they're complicated. It takes years to get up to speed on this, but there are consultants out there that you can hire to work on your behalf, and I really urge you to do them. Decarbonization is happening through the electric grid. That's your battlefront. Ignoring or giving lip service to these organizations is the wrong place to cut corners. You need to understand the products that you're providing for free today that are keeping the grid reliable, and you need to insist on being compensated. Join forces with the other thermal resources and start demanding that you get paid for all the attributes you provide for the grid today for free. Voltage support, frequency reserve, spinning reserve, black start capacity, all of these things you're providing for free today. You have to insist on being paid for them. and you can't be polite about it. Fourth, I urge you to engage in integrated resource planning processes at the state commission level. Now, I understand that sounds dreadfully boring, and it kind of is, but it's really, really important. This is where all of the decisions on resources are being made. This is where retirement decisions are being made. This is where you can understand what's driving retirements, what cost-benefit analysis is being used, whether these assumptions are plausible, and this is where you can ask questions that the utilities and the commission staff aren't asking. You don't have to go that alone. You can team up with other customers who are interested in reliable and affordable power. I think the industrial customers groups throughout the country are kind of wising up to what's coming down the pike and ready and looking for partners in this. But the integrated resource planning process is where resource decisions, generating resource decisions, are made. And they're made based on a record that the commission staff and the commissioners use to determine their decision. You can intervene in those processes, and you can make a big difference, and you can provide a voice that isn't being heard now. And then finally, provide an alternative. Right now, the path to decarbonization that has the most momentum is wind, solar, and batteries. Is that because it's the best, the cheapest, or the most viable? Maybe, but maybe not. It could be that that solution has the most momentum because it has the most advocates supporting it out of financial interest. The challenge for state and federal policymakers and state regulators like me, Sherry, and Randy is that we don't have much data. We have hardly any data to turn to when it comes to the all-in costs of decarbonization. What are the options? How do the various paths and alternatives compare? This is a big void in the conversation today, and it's a huge opportunity for your industry. You all should fill it. Tell us, what does it look like if we go down the path of decarbonization with carbon capture and storage? What does that mean in terms of a decrease in transmission build-out and costs using the infrastructure that we have today? What does that path look like, and how much does it cost? What does it save for us? How does it help with reliability? These are the things that we're not hearing. These are the things we have to start talking about before it's too late, before the decisions are made, the retirements happen, the transmission grid is built, and Americans are paying for all of that. We have to do this. It has to happen now. We don't have 2 years to wait. We certainly don't have 5 years to wait. We have to start this winter on these very things. And it can have a huge difference because people are looking for other ways to go about this. So those are my 5 recommendations. Perform at your peak this winter. Make sure you can do that. When you do, tell your story. Tell everybody what you're doing, what you're providing, how you're doing it today, how much it matters to them. Take your seat at the table in every RTO. Spread the word. Get the folks across the country in your industry activated at the RTO level on a regular basis. Engage in integrated resource planning where resource decisions are being made, and provide an alternative for a decarbonization path. This is free advice. It might be worth what you pay for it, but I hope, if nothing else, it inspires you to take the battle beyond the courtroom. I'm a utility regulator, and as such, I'm fuel neutral, and I sincerely am fuel neutral. Every one of the fuel sources has its strengths and its weaknesses. But being fuel neutral doesn't mean that I can be ignorant about the differences between the generation resources. My ultimate responsibility is to ensure that the utilities I help regulate, and as a leader in this space, that the regulatory process in our nation provides the proper oversight of this industry. It is our job to ensure that the electric grid remains reliable and affordable to the 300 million Americans whose lives and livelihoods depend on it. Thank you for your role in making that happen. I urge you to double down on your efforts to ensure a strong future for your industry in America and in the world. We need you. Thank you.
time. We have time for questions
Okay.
and
Excellent.
answers. We have time for questions and answers for Julie here. And I promise you we're going to have a longer break. Julie was ready to go, so a few minutes ago before your presentation. But we have roaming mics here. I know Jason's over here and also over, both sides. So if you have questions, we're going to take a longer break here around 10:15, depending on how questions go. So please ask away.
Hey, Julie. You know, this is nothing new on this planet, actually. Europe has gone through this whole experiment already. Prices for electricity in Germany are like 50 cents a kilowatt hour. Why aren't we talking more about the lessons learned from Europe?
Jeff, that's a good question. I can't answer why. I think in a large respect, the conversation is being driven by the folks who have, the most people at the table, and that is not the folks who want to talk about that. It's certainly something that, you hear kind of in the back room, in the side rooms, et cetera, but it's not something that comes to the forefront in a lot of the RTO discussions. I know, so John Baer, he's the head of the MISO region, and he's the leader of the group of RTOs in the world, the 15 largest grid operators in the world. He's chair of that group right now. And that group talks a lot about those kinds of issues. But the misconception when it comes to the grid operators is that they are setting the policies. They are not setting the policies. I know that everyone in this room hates to hear MISO come in and say we're policy takers, not policy makers. But that is largely the truth. They do not determine what resources come onto the grid. They determine how they're paid. They determine the rules for the pricing, but they don't tell states what you can bring to the table. They tell states, here's how much you need. Here's how much capacity you need. And here's how you can count it. They set the accreditation. That's happening right now in MISO. Really important, which is why it's so important that you perform this winter, because they're going to be setting the accreditation, how much credit you get for your resources based on your performance. So the accreditation and the market structures are set by the RTOs, but the resource mix is not. And so to the extent that the price impacts the resource mix, which we know it does, that's why Randy and I work so hard in these RTOs on these market issues, that matters. But they don't tell Minnesota, for example, what resources they can bring. So in some respects, they get yelled at constantly for not being fuel neutral if they even make a whiff of a statement that might be suggested as being anti-anything. So they talk about these things, I think, but again, they're not the ones determining the resource mix.
Hi, Julie.
Hi.
Congratulations on being president.
Thank you.
You now have a greater position to really help us. So my question for you is, what do you need from everyone in this room in the state of North Dakota to really support you so you can be more impactful to help us?
Thank you for that question. Well, let's see. I'll get out my laundry list. We could use more staff at the PSC. A personal assistant? No, I'm kidding. I think that I think we're really well positioned. My 10 years of experience, I feel like I'm ready to use what I've learned and use my voice and the confidence that I have in what's right and what's wrong about what's happening, and take that to the national level and encourage conversations. I mean, this is not a decision-making role. It's more of a leadership role in terms of setting the stage, helping people think about things, setting an agenda. but I don't have any additional authority, unfortunately. So I'm going to be doing my best to really get some conversations going that are less, perhaps, less safe, more probably controversial, but also really get to the heart of what we need to be talking about and what we need to be thinking about over the course of the next year. I will say, in one respect, there's some task forces that we've got going on some harmonization issues between the gas and electric side of the grid that we're going to be working on, that's going to require some folks to come to the table, and I'll probably be leaning on some North Dakota folks in that regard. And then just the 5 things that I outlined, really, really getting active on those 5 things are things that will help us all. So I hope you'll take those seriously and do what you can in that regard.
Julie, thank you for your leadership. What's your thoughts on the capacity market as we move forward with a new seasonal capacity, and how important capacity is for the grid and the stability and the separation between baseload generation and renewable energy sources?
So thank you, Stacey, for that question. The capacity changes that MISO's pursuing and that need to be pursued in all the RTOs are huge. And that gets to this whole question of getting paid for what you're bringing to the grid, not just as an energy, but all of your ancillary services that you provide that keep the grid reliable. This should happen 5 years ago, and we wouldn't be in the problem that we're in today. The problem is that the markets have been so delayed in providing the proper price signal to capacity resources that they've gone away. And so that needs to be corrected. It needs to be corrected fast. We had to fight for 2 years to get the MISO enough support in the state regulatory group to get the reliability-based demand curve passed, which is another just goofy way of talking about the signal that MISO sends to capacity resources and valuing those resources properly. So I think that's an important step in the right direction. I think the seasonal market, I've been a big supporter of that. I know that it's still evolving, but planning for each season is more important now than ever because the variable resources perform a lot different based on their season. Solar resources in the winter are useless, and we can't count on them. And if you're only adding up your capacity and counting it for a summer peak, then you're going to overcredit solar, and you're going to count on a resource in your mix that isn't going to be available in the winter. So those sorts of changes have happened in MISO now, and there's just getting implemented. And so I think in order to have those work the best, folks like you and your company who have real experience with the market and how these changes are taking effect need to be active in letting MISO know what works and what doesn't. Anybody else?
Hi, Julie. Thank you again so much for your leadership and your advocacy for the grid and for reliability. I learned about reliability right here at North Dakota State University, where I got my engineering degree an eon ago. And I'm just wondering, what is the temperature of your brethren across the states here for standing up for reliability and what's needed? Do you feel like you have a hard road ahead? And I'm thinking about ways that we can help you in that regard with our other state brethrens and such. What's the temperature like right now?
So thank you for that question. I would say that by and large, this industry is a victim of its own success. And people have come to just expect reliable power. And so I think that a lot of my colleagues in other states, especially the ones that are have the most aggressive decarbonization goals, my sense is that they think the grid people, they're smart and they'll figure it out. So I do feel that regulators as a whole understand their main job is ensuring reliable and affordable service. And so that's really going to be the focus of my time as NARUC president, is really getting back to the basics of we need to ensure that this is what we're providing, in addition to, you know, working on cleaner, greener, more innovation, all that. Yes, we can do that. We're a country of innovators. There's no doubt we can do that. But we can't lose sight of reliable and affordable. That's the foundation. And so I think that appealing to folks on that level is the right way, because it is our job, and it's also just exactly what we need to be focusing on. So I think that we will make headway that way. We have to get better information out, and a wider, diverse opinions, and so there's lots of room for improvement there, but we'll make progress. All right. We good? All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the questions, and I appreciate your attention and all your hard work. Thank you so much.